think the lots are your ally. You relied on them, leaned on them, believing they hold all the answers, but you merely adopted the lots. I was born with the tools, molded by them. I didn't see true color until I learned to bend it to my will, to shape the shadows and command the light. It will be the reason for your downfall.
Unless you follow this tutorial. Right then, you hunchback wafflers, flip your phone landscape, because today I'm going to be taking you through this look breakdown / tutorial of a grade that I did for this Batman fan film, created by the extraordinarily talented filmmaker that is Zach Remelan, who is also on YouTube. And if you're not tapped into Zach's channel already, you should definitely go and watch this video or one of his other videos on his channel immediately following this tutorial. There is no way that you come away from one of Zach's videos not feeling like you've gained an immense amount of knowledge and value. Zach is an incredibly talented creative, and you should all go drop him a subscribe, likes and comments. But today I'm going to be showing you how I created this pushed bleach bypass look similar to the one that you'll find in the Penguin series. And if you've not seen that, don't know what you're doing with your life, but we still ended up finding each other anyway, didn't we? Right, let's get into this look. But remember, you're not the Batman, I'm the Batman. But if you follow this tutorial, maybe you can be the Batman, but you can be Lego Batman. I'm the Batman. Right guys, before we get into any colour grading, the first thing that I want to show you are these references that I've pulled from IMDb of Colin Farrell's interpretation of the Penguin, which is incredible. Currently one of my top series, and I can't wait to watch the next season. But I wanted to take you through our reference image and break down some of the information that we're seeing first. So again, let's focus down here where the scopes are, and let's go over to vector scopes. You can see that this is a super stylized look with a whole lot of juicy juice in the image. But what is it that the scopes are showing? It is showing that this image is heavily leaning towards the warmer spectrum of our color wheel. And if you can figure out how to analyze a reference image like this, then you can also adopt techniques that the best colorists in our business are using to curate grades and palettes like this one. And some of the areas that I want to highlight very quickly, look at how they're protecting the black points of the image. You're able to tell that he's wearing a white shirt here, but naturally it adopts a warmer gradient, which is what would happen if you were wearing a white shirt in this environment. Even the skin tones still feel natural here, but they are still affected by the environment in a controlled way. And then you've got this burst of light coming from this top left corner, this motivated light, helping to push the narrative, push the story, push the emotion. Everything about this image is carefully constructed and intentful choices. And this is what we're going to try to emulate with our look. And I'm going to take you through this step by step, so you should be able to recreate a look similar to this, or use the techniques to inspire your own looks. This is the shot that I'm going to be working on today when it comes to our look. The first thing I want to do is draw your attention down to the vector scopes. You can always switch your vector scopes by hitting this drop down arrow and then selecting vector scopes. And if you go into the settings for these scopes, and what I like to do with these scopes is hit the colorize option and then hit all three of these options. That's just my preference. Sometimes you'll find that other colorists prefer to have the 2x zoom disabled, but for myself, I like to keep that enabled personally. But yeah, take a look at these scopes, then take a look at these scopes here. We're very, very close in the way that we're manufacturing our look to this reference. We've got similar points, whether it's in these yellow hues that you'll find back here as well, and the warmer tones that it's casting onto the walls, the black points and how we're trying to keep ours clean. We've got truer black points down here, even in the hair. Even just coming back to this reference here and the hair compared to ours, we're very, very close. So I'm going to be working on our look from this shot and seeing if we can potentially get even closer to one of our references. So the very first thing that I'm going to need you to do, if you've been attempting to create a bleach bypass look, is just save it, leave it where it is, hit your right click on your mouse, grab a still and just leave that for a rainy day. You can come back to that and compare your refined version to what you originally had, so you can see what you improved through this tutorial. So if you don't have a node tree, bear with me. If you do, hit Control or Command Y, and that should bring over a new color grading version. And this is going to be our starting point. So now, if we're creating this node tree from scratch, I'm going to take you through that as well. The first thing that we're going to do is either hit Alt or Option S, and we're just going to leave this node separate here, just disable that for now, so it's not impacting anything that you're doing. And then let's actually create one more and disable that as well. Then we're going to create one for our balance. Then we're going to create one for our look development, which is going to work similar to how our white balance would, but it'll be a more creative interpretation where we actually start to develop a look. Then you're going to create another node, and then all I want you to do is press Alt or Option L, and that's going to bring up our layer mixer. And after that, we're going to create another node. We're going to create another node, then we're going to create another one, and again we're going to hit Alt L, and that's also going to be a layer mixer. And then we'll create a few more nodes and leave that there, and then we can start naming these nodes. So we're going to leave this one as our balance, then we're going to go into our look development. The top one's going to be our saturation, the bottom one is going to be our contrast, the next one's going to be a custom curve, then the one after that is going to be a look adjustment. Then in this node here for the second layer mixer, we're going to be working on our highlights, and we're going to be working on our shadows, not shadows. And then these ones, I'll take you through them when it's time to actually get there. So I bet you're wondering, what's the first step in creating a bleach bypass look, Chef Odd? Well, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to right click on this here and hit composite mode, and we're going to come over and we're going to swap that to overlay. And you might be looking at this being like, yo, Chef Odd, this one look kind of crazy. Yeah, I know it looked kind of crazy. So I'm going to take you through refining this. And I'm going to switch over to waveform scopes down here in the bottom right, so I can keep this in mind when I'm pushing the image. So right, that's the first step. Convert that to an overlay composite mode, and that's going to be the basis for our bleach bypass look. So from there, what I want you to do is I want you to click on the saturation, and just like the last one, we're going to change the color space to HSV. Then we're going to disable channel 1, and we're going to disable channel 3. Then we're going to come over into our exposure node. So what I want to start off by doing is influence how much of this image we're actually seeing through our exposure, right? So what we're going to do is a little bit of back and forth. So we're going to start by dropping our gain in increments, and then we're going to lift up our gamma because that's where this face lives. We're going to drop the lift by a touch as well. Then we'll come back to our gamma and just give that a little bit more juice, and then just bring down the highs a tiny bit and just leave that one there. Then we're going to go into our look development. Now in the last video, if you watched that one, the way that we handled our white balance was via lift gamma gain. Now if you're a beginner, that's a very appropriate process, try saying that 5 times, to use. Why do I say that? Because you're trying to familiarize yourself with the actual controls in this panel. So we're going to use a very similar principle, and the thing that I want to start off by doing is just going into our offset, and we can see that everything is quite red at the moment, right? So we're just going to start coming away from the red tones by shifting it towards the cyan, and you can see we're starting to actually clean up his skin tones. We're starting to actually get back to a more neutral skin tone. So if I just hover over this, you can see that we're starting to get back to what his natural skin tone would be. But at the same time, we want to start creating that golden texture that we see in the penguin. So we're going to take our gain, and we're just going to slightly start shifting it over towards the yellow, and then we're going to take the gamma, because the gamma is generally what controls the skin tone area, and we're going to counteract that by going in the opposite direction. So yeah, it's a balancing game, right? So we're starting to establish an appropriate environment. So you can even start bringing the offset back a tiny bit, and I'm just going to leave that one there for now. What you want to do from that point is go into your custom curve, and if you come into your curve section and it looks like this, well then you've made a right toss up of it and you've pressed something that you shouldn't have pressed. So what we're going to do is go back and we're going to link it all. Stop pressing things that I haven't told you to press, okay? So there's a couple of ways that we can create this custom curve. Either we can go onto this line directly, holding shift, and create little points just like this, or what we can do is click the 3 dots just over here. You see where my mouse is going crazy, and select the option that says add those default anchor points, and it's going to give you a baseline of anchor points. So what I like to do, just because I like a little bit more finite control, is create a couple more anchor points. Maybe let's just create 2 for now, right? So I want to start giving this image a little bit more depth, because right now it's looking very, very soft. So there's a couple of things that you have to also remember. They're using some lens filtration here to be able to create this stylistic image, but at the same time, they've probably used the fog machine to soften this image as well. So we're going to take this bottom end and we're going to start bringing that down, not too far, just enough, just to start actually seeing what the contrast is doing. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use this one here and just start bringing that one down a tiny bit as well. And then I'll probably go over to this one and just give that a little lift. Give this one a little lift as well, just so we got a slightly brighter point of highlights. And you can see that we're not crushing our image, but if you just want to soften that base end of it a tiny bit, we're going to go back to the technique that we used in the last one, where I showed you how to use the low soft to create a slightly matted black opposed to a glossy black. So now that we've started to actually inject some contrast into this, it's also increasing the amount of saturation. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into the saturation node that we created, and you're going to go into your primary wheels, and we're going to take the gain and we're going to drop that like crack, and we're going to pull it back to around about halfway, say around about 50. Yeah, we'll go to about 50. Now that stripped back a lot of saturation. And one thing that you need to remember when you're creating a bleach bypass look is that these highlight points need to be very creamy, they need to be very silverish, they need to look like Robert Pattinson when he was doing up Twilight. So as we pull the saturation out of this image, we're starting to generate a look that is closer associated with what a bleach bypass look would actually look like. From there, what we're going to do is go into our look adjustment node. So I want you to go into your offset, start bringing it towards the warmer quadrant. You don't need to go crazy, you just need to do little bits, and we're going to take that gain and we're also going to shift that towards a yellowy orange. Now, as you can see, we're starting to create a cast on this back wall that we don't necessarily want. So what we're going to do is we're going to counteract that. In our lift, we're just going to start bringing this towards the cyan, and as you can see, it started to clean up those black points. So you're just going to play around with that ever so slightly, just subtly, and you can see that it's starting to clean up those shadows while still protecting the color that we've just injected into this image. And I'm going to show you another technique as well to clean it up even further. But I like that. See, I like where we're going with this one. If you stick with me, I stick with you. If you be mine, I be your boo. Bars. Enough of that sass. Go into your contrast, and what I want to do is I want to minimize some of the crunch that I'm getting here. So I'm going to go into where this contrast is, and I'm just going to pull that back ever so slightly. One of the things that I learned from a really amazing colorist called Cameron Marigold is the way he achieves his filmic looks is by nurturing that contrast. One thing that we can learn from that when it comes to creating beautiful images, it's also very much so a contrast game. It's not just going into all of these nodes that we're creating and pushing a fat ton of color into them. But I'm starting to like where we're at with this. So now what we're going to do is move on to our next layer mixer, and we're going to go into our highs. And what we're going to do is we're going to press Shift and H, and we're going to just increase that low soft, soften it up a tiny piece, and start drawing that up. And you can see now we're starting to grab the highlights. And what I want to be able to do is fine tune that so we're grabbing just a little bit more than what you would consider as spectral highlights. So I'm just going to make sure I'm not grabbing any of his chin fuzz. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the shadows, and then you want to go into the high soft and increase that a bit, and then take the highs, start bringing that down. And if you can't see what it's doing, remember to hit Shift H, and then you'll see that you're starting to get those darkest points. Then what I'm going to do is go back into the highlights. Now I'm going to shift it over to my HDR wheels, hit Shift H, and you take this slider here, and as you can see, the further up you go, the more it closes the image. The lower you bring it, the more it opens it up, and then this one slightly feathers it out. And what I would like to do with this is increase the highlights to around about 40%, and this for me, it gives it a little bit more pop in the image. And then what you can do is take your midpoint in your light and then inject a little bit of that color in there, and then we're starting to create that golden look similar to what we were seeing in our references. The key thing that I want you to remember whilst we're creating this look is that everything is practice, and this is why I wanted to go through this look recreation with yourself and see if we could get a slightly different result, whether it was closer to the reference or maybe it's a little bit further away. Maybe this is our fresh interpretation of what we saw from the references, right? The more we practice our skills, the more we hone them in, the better our results are going to end up. But you got to go back and forth till you hit the sweet spot. Go into your shadows, hit log. Let's drop that down by about maybe 2%. And we see we're starting to darken that up. I like what we're doing here, but I feel like the image is missing some of the saturation that we've got here in the face and even in the back with this motivated light. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into my look adjustment, and then I'm going to take the gain. I'm just going to add a little bit more into that. And you can see that it just influences the image in a way that's positive. And if you still feel like it needs a little bit more saturation, you can always go back into this first layer mixer, take the slider and add a little bit more saturation into there. But it is very important to remember that the natural result of a bleach bypass is a more desaturated look. So you don't want to just start going crazy and adding bare saturation into this and being like, yeah, I learned this look from Shefford, because nah, that's just not what I taught you. So you want to be more particular with the amount of saturation that you're adding in. One thing that I would like to do is start shifting this yellow to a slightly warmer hue. So in the look adjustment node that we created, we're going to go into our hue versus hue. We're going to select yellow and we're going to start raising that up a tiny bit just so it warms everything up to feel more golden and amber. It's little adjustments like this that can emphasize a natural warmth without overwhelming the scene. Now, if Christy Shep were looking hella dry like your kneecaps before this, you should now have something that's a lot nicer to look at. And if it's not, then that's your fault. And now for these final few nodes, I'm going to show you a few things that your pops never did. So we're going to start by grabbing a glow out of our effects library, applying it to node after the second layer mixer, and then I'm going to show you how to make it bloody lovely. And the way that we're going to make it a more tasteful glow is, first and foremost, we're going to come over to our composite type, hit soft light, then we're going to draw back the shine threshold, so we're grabbing more of the image, and we're going to pull back some of the spread just because I don't want it affecting everything, because this shot that I have specifically has a lot of blur integrated within it. Now you might think, whoa, Shefford, this shot don't look good no more. That means I'm not going to purchase your lessons. Well, my youth, the first thing that you need to do is pull back this saturation to maybe around about 275. Just draw out some of the saturation that it adds, because a natural additive of a glow is to increase the amount of saturation in the image. And then we're just going to recover some of the brightness, and you can see that the way that this image is now impacted looks a lot nicer. But we are starting to lose some of the shadows, so one thing that we can do is just go back into our balance and just lift up that lift tiny bit, pull back some of the highlights just a tad, even go into our highlight that we created for this layer mixer and just draw back some of that. Again, it's a balancing act. Go back and tweak some of the elements just so you have a more refined image. Then what we're going to do is go into our blur node, and we're going to take this where it says R, and we're going to just drop that down to about 47 just to sharpen up the image a tiny bit. And I'll show you what it's doing, because if I zoom into my man's bogies, more so his eyes, you can just see here this little speck. You can see that it's quite blurry before, and it just sharpens it up a tiny bit as well, which also helps with creating a more digestible look. Now, you have an option. You can either place grain on this final node, or you can go to our second node here and add some film grain there. But what I want to do is add a slightly more aggressive amount of grain. So if I show you what this grain looks like, this one here feels a little bit more blotchy. And what I do prefer is the 500T variation, just because the size is more finite. So you can even decrease the size, you can increase its strength. And like I said, we're going to go for an aggressive look, so you can already see how much of that grain is being added into the image, but it looks nice. However, if the 16mm grain is too strong for your preference, you can always switch it to a 35mm 400T, which is a little bit softer, and you can increase and play around with the parameters just to fine tune it to your specific taste. And as my mentor, one of the best in the games, Kazi, always says, we are taste makers at the end of the day, so we have to be very selective with the way that we curate our images. And if you prefer that, then stick with that one then, bro. I'm not your pops. Do what you want. And if you follow the tutorial step by step, then your final image should have gone from looking oh so crusty to oh so crispy. Even just going back and forth from our reference and looking at the scopes, we can see that we're pretty much in the same environment, similar tonality, none of the image is blown out, and none of the image is completely lost. We're protecting our image. You can see here in our penguin reference that the motivated light in the background is inducing that yellow hue, so you can always go back into your look adjustment and try and match it even closer. But remember, we are working with skin in our reference, so we do still want to retain some of that natural element, even though our motivated light is emulating fire. So it's all about making intelligent choices, analyzing your footage, analyzing the environment, and understanding what we're presenting with the scene and what would be an appropriate choice for our grade. So now if I go over to one of the other clips from our sequence, again, it's a very similar process to the last one. We've done our balance, we've done our look development. The only difference with this is I've created some masks because I didn't want the right hand side of this image to take away the attention. So I've pulled that back by creating a gradient mask and then using the offset to pull it back a touch, and then even going into our contrast, activating editable splines, and then taking that top end, the highlights, and just pulling that back a little bit. You just gotta do it a little bit, because if you go too far, then you're gonna end up with a crusty shot, and that just don't look good. You get me? I wanted to bring him out, so I created another node, created a gradient mask and tracked it, and then with the editable splines, I just brought him out a touch, and you can see that the shots, they're not far off. They're all in the same environment. The only thing that I would say about this shot, having looked at it now again, is I would probably just pull back the saturation even further. But one thing that is sticking out to me in this shot is this sheet. It's looking a little bit more magenta than what I would actually prefer it to look. So if I just go here into the mask where I separated this section, what you can do is go into the hues, take that red, and just drop that down a tiny bit, just so it's not leaning towards the magenta. But remember, considering our references, there are points where magenta is quite prevalent, so you could even stylize it to feel a little bit more like that if you wanted. But for the nature of this shot, I prefer the uniform look of it being a little bit more along the lines of a golden color. And if you've done everything I told you, crusty buddies, then you should end up with a shot that looks like this, which for me feels really nice. I really like where this image has ended up in comparison to where we were before. If we just go back to the original shot, the original image contains isolation points where we use windows and masks to draw focus, whereas the version that we've just worked on doesn't have any windows integrated. So if you do want to draw some more focus to your subject, you can always go ahead and create a window. So depending on what you prefer or what you're aiming for, you can use your due diligence to decide which is more appropriate for your project. So if you enjoyed this tutorial, what I need you wobbling up turners to do is hit like, hit comment, hit share, show me that you care. Because if I'm going to keep making these tutorials, I need you lot to do your part so I can continue doing my part. And if you're still struggling with color grading, connect with me over on Instagram at oddgoats, where you can book one-to-one sessions with me, who's your daddy, and I can help you on a more personal level, take you through your projects, or even just work on refining your skills. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this one. Let me know what you think. Chef Odd, peace.